Imagine a world where every person, every business, every government is drowning in an ocean of debt so vast, so incomprehensible, that the human mind struggles to grasp its magnitude. This is not a dystopian fiction. This is our reality today. The number is 315 trillion. Let me say that again, $315 trillion. To put this in perspective, if you earned one every single second, it would take you over 10 million years to accumulate this amount. This is the total global debt, the collective burden humanity has placed upon its own shoulders. But here's what makes this truly terrifying: this debt is 3 times larger than the entire global economy. Think about that. The world produces about 105 trillion worth of goods and services every year. That's every iPhone sold, every car manufactured, every service rendered, every crop harvested. And yet, we owe 3 times that amount. Every single year, 10% of everything the planet produces, all the food grown, all the technology created, all the services provided, goes solely to paying interest on this debt. Not the principal. Just the interest. 10% of human productivity, gone, just to service what we owe. This means 1 out of every 10 hours you work, 1 out of every 10 products manufactured, 1 out of every 10 innovations created, it all goes to creditors. It's a tax on existence itself. And this tax flows predominantly in one direction, from workers to creditors, from poor to rich, from developing nations to developed ones. How did we get here? The story of our global debt trap is a tale of good intentions, short-term thinking, and systemic failure that spans 5 decades. In the 1970s, global debt was manageable. Countries ran balanced budgets or modest deficits. Corporations borrowed prudently. Households saved. The total global debt to GDP ratio hovered around 100%, meaning the world owed roughly what it produced in a year. Fast forward to today, and that ratio has exploded to 300%. We've tripled our collective burden in just 50 years. But the acceleration has been most dramatic in the last 15 years, following the 2008 financial crisis. Here's what happened. When the 2008 crisis hit, governments and central banks faced a choice. They could allow the recession to run its course, letting bad businesses fail, allowing debt to be written off, accepting short-term pain for long-term health. Instead, they chose the opposite approach. They decided to prevent failure at all costs. Central banks slashed interest rates to 0 and in some cases below 0. They printed trillions of dollars, euros, yen, and yuan. Governments bailed out banks, propped up failing companies, and stimulated demand through massive spending programs. It worked in the short term. The global economy stabilized. Markets recovered. We avoided a complete collapse. But we hadn't solved the problem. We had simply postponed it. We had taken the patient who was sick from too much debt and given them more debt as medicine. We put the entire global economy on life support and we never took it off. The consequences of this choice are now apparent. That ocean of cheap money didn't go into productive investments. It didn't raise wages or fund innovation. Instead, it inflated asset prices to absurd levels. Stock markets soared not because companies were more productive, but because cheap debt allowed them to buy back their own shares. Real estate prices exploded not because more people could afford homes, but because cheap mortgages and speculation drove bidding wars. Bond prices reached levels never seen in 5,000 years of financial history. We created the everything bubble, and bubbles always pop. Even worse, all that cheap money kept terrible businesses alive. These are the zombie companies, corporations that can't generate enough profit to cover their debt payments at normal interest rates. They survive only because money is artificially cheap. In a healthy economy, these companies would fail. But we've prevented this natural process for over 15 years. The result: productivity has stalled. Innovation has slowed. The economy is clogged with the walking dead. Japan tried this in the 1990s and never recovered. Now the world is repeating Japan's mistake. Let us break down the debt. Governments owe 90 trillion. Corporations owe 88 trillion. Financial institutions owe 70 trillion. Households owe 67 trillion. But the real danger is that all these debts are interconnected. A default in one corner sends shockwaves through the entire global system. We saw it in 2008, in the Eurozone crisis, and in the 2020 pandemic. The system is fragile and getting more fragile every day. Now let us talk about the truly insidious part: interest payments. With 315 trillion in debt and average interest around 10%, that means 31.5 trillion is paid every year in interest alone. That amount is larger than the combined economies of China and Japan. For ordinary people, this shows up as lower wages, higher taxes, higher prices, and reduced government services. This is the hidden tax on existence, 10% of everything, every year. Where does this money go? To creditors. And over time, creditors become fewer and wealthier. The top 1% now owns more than half of global wealth. Debt acts as a wealth concentration machine, transferring resources from the many to the few. Throughout history, civilizations have collapsed under unpayable debt: Rome, Mesopotamia, medieval Europe, Latin America in the 1980s, Asia in 1997, Europe in 2011. The pattern is always the same: debt builds, interest rises, debtors can't pay, collapse. The mathematics is simple: when debt grows faster than the economy, eventually debt service consumes the economy itself. Today, debt productivity, the GDP created per dollar borrowed, has collapsed from 5 per 1 borrowed to less than 1, sometimes 0.30. This is the definition of a global Ponzi scheme. And it ends when new borrowing can no longer cover old interest. Now the question: can this debt ever be repaid? No. To repay 315 trillion would require using every dollar of global output for 3 years. No food, no healthcare, no society. Impossible. That leaves 3 paths: growth, default, or inflation. Growth is impossible at needed levels. Default is politically unacceptable to creditors. So governments choose the third path: inflation, printing money, devaluing currency, and silently destroying purchasing power. It is a stealth default. The numbers stay the same, but the value melts away. We've done this before the 1970s inflation crisis, and we are heading there again, only bigger, faster, and global.